2-5-1 chord sequence is one of the most common chord movements in all of music. It's a chord sequence that can be found in thousands of songs, and today we're going to take a look at how we can add this simple chord sequence to the blues. We can use these chords to connect the dots between the different places in a simple blues progression to add more color and sophistication to our rhythm parts and lead lines. My name is Jack Ruch. Welcome to my channel. Let's get into it. So when we talk about a 2-5-1, we're talking about the 2 chord, the 5 chord, and the 1 chord in the key. Now today we're in the key of A major. So the 2 chord in this key would be a B minor 7 chord. The 5 chord would be an E7 chord, and then that would resolve normally to an A major 7 chord if we were strictly in the key of A major. But in the case of a blues, it's pretty common to have a dominant chord as the 1 chord. So in this case, we're going to do B minor 7 as our 2 chord, E7 as our 5 chord, and then resolve to an A7 chord, right? This is a 2-5-1 in the key of A in the kind of way you would use it in a blues. But this chord cadence, this resolution of chords can be moved around and used to resolve to different chords in the progression. One of the common ways to do this is to actually use a 2-5-1 going to the 4 chord. And the 4 chord in the key of A in a blues would be a D7 chord, right? That's your 4 chord. So a 2-5-1 of D7 in this case would be E minor 7 as the 2 chord, then to A7 as the 5 chord, and then resolving to D7, right? This is called a 2-5-1 of the 4 chord, right? You'll hear things like 2-5-1 get thrown around, and really it just means a cadence, a cycle of chords that resolves to a different place. And when you get into learning jazz standards or things like Ray Charles songs that have, long involved turnaround sections, you see 2-5-1s popping up all over the place. But for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to use the 2-5-1 in 2 different spots. We're going to use it going to the 4 chord, and then we're going to use it to come back to the 1 chord. So I'm going to play some rhythm now along to a backing track. And the backing track is going to be very simple, just a 1-4-5 blues. So an A7 to D7, back to A7, then to E7, the 5 chord, and then back to the 4 chord into the 1 chord. The bass is going to be just holding down a very simple bass line. And the first time around playing rhythm, I'm going to play just basic chords. I'm going to play like a 13 chord, an A13 chord for the 1 chord, and then I'm going to go to a D9 chord for the 4 chord, back to A13, and then an E9 for the 5 chord, D9 for the 4 chord. So some pretty basic, common kind of blues voicings for playing rhythm guitar. And I'm just going to comp through playing just the 1-4-5. And I'll throw in a few fills, really kind of common staples of blues rhythm playing. But before it goes to the 4 chord, the second time around, I'll throw in a little 2-5-1 so you can hear what that sounds like. So when we go to the 4 chord, I'll sneak in this little E minor 7 to an A7 or A13 and then resolve to the D chord. So you can hear where that falls in the progression. And then as we come back to the 1 chord, I'll do it again, but in resolving to A, I'll do a B minor to E7 and then come back to our A7. That's coming from the 4 chord back to the 1 chord. So I'll play through that now. First time's just going to be 1-4-5. Second time around, I'll add the 2-5-1s in. so now that you can see where those 2-5-1s can fall in the progression, let's get into how we can dissect these chords to come up with some different lines and incorporate the chord tones from these different chords to create some lines that sort of move through the progression. And again, the bass on this track is not playing any of these chords. It's not hitting any of this stuff. But the cool thing about, this type of thing is we're kind of superimposing the sound of these chords over what's happening in the music. And particularly when it comes to playing lead lines, this works really well, because if you understand how this harmony works and how you can use it to your advantage, then the lines are going to make sense in their own way. And the other musicians, the bass player or another guitar player or keyboard player, doesn't necessarily have to hit these chords for it to work. You can play these things that sort of outline these different chord changes, and they're going to work just fine, as long as you do it in the right spots and resolve in the right way to the next chord in the progression. So we're going to look at a very simple line to kind of outline these chords. Our first one is going to be the 2-5-1 heading to D. So E minor 7 to A7, and then resolving to D. And what we're going to do is we're just going to play down the notes of E minor 7. We're going to start on B, and then go down to G, and then to E, and then down to D. So that is the 5th, minor 3rd, root, and flat 7 of an E minor 7 chord. And we're just going to use that to outline that chord. Then from here, we're going to shift to our A7, which is the 5 chord of the 2-5-1, and we're just going to go, and we're going to go down to the 3rd of that chord. Again, it really helps if you can just see the bar chord shape as it falls underneath the chord, underneath the line. So there's our 3rd, and then we can go right up to the 5th and the flat 7th, right out of this chord voicing. So, and then right here is where we're going to add one little spicy note to add a little bit of tension. And we're going to play the note B flat, which is like a flat 9 over an A7 chord, which gives this little kind of diminished sound, which builds a little bit of tension, which is a really nice thing. It doesn't work all the time, but in the case of a blues, you can kind of sneak it in there, and it gives you a nice kind of little tense, altered color to the chord. So, and then we're going to resolve down to a chord tone of that D chord. We're going to land on the 3rd of that chord as it falls. So, and if we give it a little bit of swing to kind of fit in with that shuffle rhythm, right, we can do things like that. And we can change up the fingering even if we don't want to do, we can do, which is kind of nice. So, and we can walk up chromatically to that 3rd. So you can mess around with that depending on the tempo of the song, depending on the feel, whether it's swung, whether it's straight, whether it's a slow blues where the chords are moving very slowly and you have a lot of time, or if it's an up-tempo thing and you've got to kind of fit it in a small window of time. You can mess with the phrasing of this. And I play these kinds of lines phrased all sorts of different ways. But the whole idea really is just to understand kind of what's under the hood, what's happening theoretically with a line like this. It's basically, we're using this little harmonic device of a 2-5-1, and we're superimposing it in a certain place in this progression to get from one place to another. And then we're using the chord tones of those chords to create a line that sort of moves through these chords. Right, and we can tie it in with other things that we know how to play. Now I'm going to take this same line and play it on a different set of strings when we go back to the 1 chord. So from our 4 chord, heading back to the 1 chord, we're going to play B minor 7, E7, and then come back to A7. And I'm going to play the same thing, but I'm going to move it down. Right? So there's my B minor. Right? Same line. Right? So I'm playing the fifth minor 3rd root and flat 7 of a B minor 7, and then I'm coming down to the 3rd, 5th, flat 7, flat 9 of an E7, and then doing sort of a little bit of a chromatic enclosure. This would be the 4th to the 9th, walking up to the 3rd of my A7. And again, you could finger that different ways. Right, you can play this all different ways and all over the fretboard. One of the cool things about the guitar is how we can take the same ideas and move them all over the place. But these are the 2 lines I'm going to use. So now I'm going to play over the backing track. And in those spots where we're putting those 2-5-1s in, I'm going to play this line. I'm going to weave it in with some other licks so you can hear how it kind of fits and how it phrases in the natural flow of a solo. So now that we've got a handle on a very simple way of navigating over these chords and playing the same basic phrase, I'm going to play a solo now. I'm going to play 2 times through the progression, and I'm going to use these lines that we just discussed, but I'm also going to use some other 2-5-1 lines to navigate through these chords. And I'm just going to demonstrate how I would naturally use this kind of stuff as I'm building a solo over this type of a tune. And again, there's no accompaniment underneath that's hitting these chords. The bass is strictly just sticking to the 1-4-5. There's no keyboard or rhythm guitar under here to highlight these chords. So it's strictly just my decision as a soloist to kind of do this stuff. But this is the kind of thing you hear tons of guys do, especially in the jazz world, is kind of reharmonize things and choose their own sort of chords that they're hearing in their head and then outline those within their solo. This is a great way to kind of play, not really outside, because nothing we're playing really is too far out of the basic realm of the blues and the basic key center. But it is a way of really breaking out of, you know, typical scale patterns and typical types of blues licks that you might get stuck into when you're playing this style. So I'm just going to play freely a couple times through this, but every time these spots come up, the 2-5-1 going to the 4 chord and then the 2-5-1 coming back to the 1 chord, I'm going to play things that highlight that sound so you can hear how it sort of naturally falls in a solo. right, so all the tabs for this solo, tabs and notation, will be available up on my Patreon page, as well as this backing track. I may throw it up with a little bit of rhythm guitar, just so it's a little bit more of a fleshed out backing track. But I've got literally hundreds of posts of tabs and notation, different jam tracks up there on my Patreon site. It's only $5 a month. It's a great way to support this channel. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I've got content for all my lessons up here on YouTube, up over there. So definitely check that out if you'd like the tabs to kind of suss out everything that I played in the solo. But definitely dig into these 2-5-1s and try them out. Try them out in different progressions that you're working on. Even if it's a simple 2-chord thing, just going from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, this can be a great way to kind of look at it from a different angle and maybe build up some new vocabulary. And like I said, anything you learn here, you can move around the fretboard. It's going to be a different fingering as you move it onto different string sets, but it's also going to set you up and lead you into different possibilities with the next thing that you play. And that's a big part of this thing of kind of playing through changes, is just getting in the flow where you can connect the dots from one place to the next freely and as fluidly as possible. So I hope you dig this lesson. I hope you get something from this, and come join me over on Patreon. And until next time, I'm Jack Ruch. Happy practicing, and take care.